The unthinkable. The phone call came at 2:29 a.m. I've always feared middle-of-the-night calls, those harbingers of news too terrible to wait for daylight. My trembling hand reached for the phone on the third ring. Helen Carter, this is Providence General Hospital. Your son, Michael Carter, has been admitted with a suspected brain aneurysm. You should come immediately. The world tilted on its axis. At 66, I had lived through my husband's death a decade earlier, but nothing had prepared me for this moment. Michael, my brilliant, kind-hearted only child, couldn't be dying. It wasn't the natural order of things. I arrived at the hospital still wearing my nightgown beneath my coat hair, uncombed hands shaking as I gave my name at the reception desk. A grim-faced doctor led me to a private consultation room, and the words that followed destroyed my world. Massive aneurysm. No warning signs. Nothing could have been done. Already gone. Already gone. My Michael gone. Hours blurred together as paperwork was processed, and decisions no mother should ever make were thrust upon me. It was nearly noon when Vanessa Hale, Michael's wife of 11 years, finally arrived. Designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, expensively manicured nails, tapping impatiently on her phone. There was traffic, she offered, without meeting my gaze, and I had to find someone to watch Ethan Carter. I had already called Ethan's school, spoken with his teacher, and arranged for him to spend the day with his best friend's family. The fact that Vanessa hadn't thought to do this, that she'd left their 9-year-old son without information about his father's condition, was sadly typical of the woman my son had married. Michael is gone, I said, simply watching for the reaction that would tell me how to respond. Vanessa's perfectly lipstick mouth formed a small O of surprise. Her hand fluttered to her throat in a gesture that might have seemed natural if I hadn't spent years observing my daughter-in-law's calculated performances. But he was fine yesterday, Vanessa said, her voice catching. We had dinner, and then he was working in his study. I went to bed early. I didn't even say goodnight. For a moment, genuine regret seemed to flash across her face, quickly replaced by something I couldn't quite identify. Relief calculation. Whatever emotion had surfaced was quickly masked by a more appropriate expression of shock. As the day progressed, I watched Vanessa make phone calls in hushed tones, stepping away whenever hospital staff approached with questions about funeral arrangements. When decisions needed to be made about Michael's remains, Vanessa deferred to me with a casualness that seemed oddly detached. You know what he would have wanted better than I do. By evening, as we waited for Michael's body to be released to the funeral home, Daniel Brooks arrived. Michael's closest friend since law school and his personal attorney. His genuine grief was apparent in his reddened eyes and tight embrace as he held me. I can't believe he's gone, Daniel whispered. I just had lunch with him on Monday. I nodded, unable to form words through my grief. Daniel turned to Vanessa Hale, offering condolences that were met with a practiced somber nod. We'll need to meet soon, Daniel said, his professional tone returning slightly. There are matters in Michael's will that will need immediate attention. Vanessa straightened at this, dabbing at eyes that remained suspiciously dry behind her sunglasses. Of course. Perhaps tomorrow. I'd like to get things settled quickly for Ethan Carter's sake. The mention of my grandson pierced through my fog of grief. Ethan, sweet, sensitive Ethan, who had lost his father and whose mother was already thinking about settling things quickly. Ethan should be told in person, I said firmly. He'll go with you to pick him up. That's not necessary, Vanessa replied quickly. I can handle my own son. The slight emphasis on my wasn't lost on me. It was a familiar dynamic. Vanessa asserting control over Ethan when it suited her narrative as devoted mother, while relegating actual parenting to Michael. And increasingly to me, he adores you, Vanessa added, her tone softening artificially. Hell need his grandmother more than ever now. The manipulation was transparent to me. After 30 years as a psychology professor, I'd studied enough human behavior to recognize what she was doing. Vanessa was already positioning herself, ensuring I would remain available for childcare while establishing clear boundaries of authority. As we left the hospital, I caught sight of Vanessa checking her reflection in a window, adjusting her hair before pulling out her phone to make another call. In that unguarded moment, with no audience to perform for her face, showed neither grief nor shock, only cool assessment, like someone calculating their next move in a chess game. I turned away, my heart breaking anew. Not only had I lost my beloved son, but it appeared my grandson was in the hands of a woman who saw his father's death as an inconvenience at best, an opportunity at worst. What I couldn't know then was that Michael had foreseen this very scenario and had taken extraordinary measures to protect both me and his son from the woman he had finally recognized as a threat to us both. In the coming days, as I struggled through the fog of grief to arrange my son's funeral, I would begin to uncover the breadth of Michael's foresight and the depth of Vanessa's deception. But that night, as I returned to my empty house alone, I could only clutch my son's childhood photo to my chest and wonder how I would find the strength to face the days ahead. For Ethan Carter, I told myself, I must be strong for Ethan. Something in Vanessa Hale's behavior had triggered every protective instinct I possessed. My grandson had lost his father. I was determined he wouldn't lose his grandmother too. Not when I suspected he would need me more than ever. A devastating midnight call has shattered my world, but something doesn't feel right about my daughter-in-law's reaction to my son's death. What secrets was Michael keeping about his failing marriage? And what measures did he take to protect us before his untimely death? I couldn't know then that my greatest challenge as a mother was just beginning. I've attended enough funerals in my 66 years to recognize genuine grief. It manifests differently in each person. Some collapse inward, some rage, some grow eerily calm, but there's an authenticity that can't be fabricated. As I sat in the front pew of the church, watching people approach my son's casket, I observed a masterclass in emotional performance from my daughter-in-law. Vanessa had dressed impeccably in a designer black dress that managed to be both appropriate and flattering. Her hair was styled in subdued waves, her makeup subtle yet flawless, tear-proof mascara evident as she dabbed occasionally at dry eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She leaned against me at calculated intervals, murmuring things like, "He would have appreciated such a turnout," and "Michael always spoke so highly of everyone here." To observers, we appeared as a united front of grief. The devastated widow and the heartbroken mother supporting each other through unimaginable loss. Only I could feel how lightly she rested against my shoulder, ready to straighten the moment someone important approached. Only I noticed how her eyes constantly scanned the room, assessing each mourner's social and financial status. Only I caught the subtle changes in her voice when speaking to Michael's wealthier clients versus his childhood friends. But my attention was primarily focused on Ethan seated on my other side, his small body occasionally shaking with silent sobs. Unlike his mother, my grandson's grief was raw and real, his face blotchy from genuine tears. I kept my arm around him, offering tissues and quiet comfort as he stared at the casket containing his father. "Is Daddy really in there?" he whispered during a lull in the service. "His body is," I explained gently. "But the special part that made him Daddy, his love, his thoughts, his spirit, that's still with you always." Ethan nodded, seeming to understand this distinction better than many adults. "I can still feel him sometimes, like he's watching." "I believe he is," I said, fighting back fresh tears. Vanessa leaned across me. "Ethan, sit up straight. People are watching." I felt his small shoulders stiffen under my arm. This concern with appearances rather than her son's emotional state was precisely why Michael had been increasingly leaving Ethan in my care over the past year. After the service, the procession of mourners offering condolences seemed endless. Michael had been well loved by colleagues at his law firm, by clients he had helped, by neighbors and friends. Each person had a story about his kindness, his integrity, his subtle humor. "Your son helped me keep my house during my divorce," one woman told me, clasping my hands. "He reduced his fees when he learned I was struggling, then connected me with financial advisors who helped me get back on my feet." Michael was the only attorney who took my discrimination case when no one else would, an elderly gentleman said. He cared about justice, not just billable hours. These testimonials were bittersweet balm to my aching heart. My son had lived his values, had made a difference. I stored each story carefully in my memory, knowing Ethan would treasure them someday. Throughout the reception, I noticed Vanessa Hale having intense, whispered conversations with several people, including a tall, expensively dressed man I didn't recognize. When I approached, they separated smoothly, Vanessa introducing him as Eric Landon, one of Michael's real estate investment partners. "My condolences, Mrs. Carter," he said, his handshake brief and impersonal. Michael was a remarkable man. Something in his tone rang false, and the way Vanessa's hand briefly touched his arm suggested a familiarity beyond business acquaintance. I filed this observation away, my professor's brain automatically cataloging behavioral details even through my grief. By evening's end, exhaustion threatened to overwhelm me. Ethan had fallen asleep on a couch in the funeral home's private room, emotionally spent. As I arranged his suit jacket over him like a blanket, Daniel Brooks, Michael's attorney, approached quietly. "Helen, could we speak privately for a moment?" I followed him to a secluded corner away from lingering mourners. "Michael left explicit instructions about certain matters," Daniel said, keeping his voice low. "I can't go into details yet, but he asked me to tell you one thing immediately. Trust your instincts about Ethan. Does that make sense to you?" I glanced toward my sleeping grandson, then at Vanessa, who was checking her makeup in a compact mirror, while nodding absently at condolences. "Yes," I said slowly. "I believe it does." "Good. We'll need to meet officially tomorrow about the will, but Michael wanted you to know that." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Arrangements have been made for both of you." Before I could ask more questions, Vanessa approached, her social smile firmly in place. "Daniel, I hope we can resolve everything quickly," she said. "I'm thinking of taking Ethan away for a while after this. A healing trip. Probably best to handle the estate matters promptly." "Of course," Daniel replied neutrally. "My office tomorrow at 2. As we prepared to leave, I gathered Ethan Carter into my arms, his slight weight a precious burden. Vanessa Hale made no move to help, instead scrolling through her phone. 19 missed calls. She sighed. So many arrangements to make. I studied her composed face, noting the absence of grief's telltale signs, no swollen eyes, no exhaustion of spirit, none of the physical manifestations of heartbreak that were currently crushing me from within. "What arrangements?" I asked carefully, keeping my tone curious rather than accusatory. "Life goes on. Helen," she said, not looking up from her screen. "Sales accounts notifications. Michael handled everything. Now it's all on me. Not us. Not we'll figure it out together for Ethan." The solitary me spoke volumes. As I settled Ethan into my car, Vanessa had asked if I would keep him overnight to give her space to process. I felt a strange sense of foreboding, mixed with something else. Something that felt almost like my son's presence urging me to stay vigilant, to watch carefully, to protect what he could no longer protect himself. "We're going to be okay, Ethan?" I whispered to my sleeping grandson. "Somehow, we're going to be okay." I didn't yet know how prophetic or how challenging that promise would prove to be. The funeral reveals striking contrasts between Vanessa's calculated performance and Ethan's genuine grief. As I observe my daughter-in-law's suspicious behavior, a cryptic message from Michael's attorney suggests my son anticipated trouble. What arrangements did Michael make before his death? And what is Vanessa already planning while we're still saying goodbye? Michael left everything to me. Vanessa's perfect composure slipped for the first time as she sat in Daniel Brooks' office the day after the funeral. I watched her face cycle through emotions. First smug satisfaction, then confusion, and finally thinly veiled outrage as Daniel continued reading the will's provisions. Not exactly Daniel corrected his professional tone unchanged. Mr. Carter left you the lakeside cabin property, his investment portfolio with Summit Capital Partners, and a life insurance policy of $600,000. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, as Daniel outlined the inheritance that had left Vanessa increasingly agitated while substantial by most standards, around $1.2 million in total. It clearly fell short of her expectations. The family home at 1836 Maple Grove Drive, both vehicles and his personal bank account at Heritage Bank, are bequeathed to his mother, Helen Carter. Daniel continued not meeting either of our eyes as he read directly from the document. "That's impossible," Vanessa interrupted, her carefully manicured nails digging into the leather armrests. "We purchased that house together. It's our marital property." Daniel slid a document across the desk. "The house was purchased solely in Michael's name before your marriage. It was never converted to joint property. The deed and mortgage documents confirm this." I kept my expression neutral despite my own shock. Michael had never mentioned any of these arrangements to me. The family home, a beautiful colonial with 4 bedrooms and a backyard where Ethan Carter had his treehouse, was apparently mine, not Vanessa Hale's. So were Michael's BMW 5 Series and Lexus RX, along with a bank account I hadn't known existed. "What about Ethan Carter's college fund?" Vanessa demanded, her voice rising slightly. "Michael always said he was setting aside money for Ethan's education." Daniel Brooks nodded. "Mr. Carter established a trust for Ethan's educational expenses. You are not the trustee of this account." "Then who is?" Vanessa's question came out as nearly a hiss. Daniel glanced at me briefly. "Helen Carter has been named trustee of all funds related to Ethan's care and education." The room fell silent as Vanessa processed this information. I could almost see the calculations happening behind her eyes, totaling assets, weighing options, formulating responses. "This makes no sense," she finally said, her voice deliberately modulated to convey wounded confusion rather than the anger I could see simmering beneath. "Michael and I discussed our estate plans. This is nothing like what we agreed upon." Daniel cleared his throat. "The will was updated 4 months ago. Michael came to me specifically to make these changes. Everything is legally executed and witnessed." 4 months ago, Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "He never mentioned any changes to me." "That was his prerogative," Daniel replied simply. I remained silent, absorbing the implications of what I was hearing. 4 months ago, Michael had secretly revised his will to ensure I would have the family home and financial resources while limiting Vanessa's access to certain assets. The timing corresponded with a period when Michael had seemed particularly troubled, often bringing Ethan to stay with me for father-son weekends that I suspected were actually meant to give Michael space to deal with marital issues. "There must be some mistake," Vanessa said, turning to me with a practiced look of appeal. "Helen, you know Michael would have wanted his family to remain in their home. You have your own house. Surely you don't intend to take ours away from Ethan." The subtle manipulation was impressive, framing any enforcement of Michael's wishes as me taking something from my grandson rather than from her. I recognized the tactic but chose not to confront it directly. "I'm as surprised as you are, Vanessa," I said truthfully. "I need time to process all of this." Daniel continued with additional details, items about personal effects, specific bequests to charities, funeral expenses that had been prearranged. Throughout it all, I noticed Vanessa Hale texting under the table, her face a mask of appropriate grief occasionally disrupted by flashes of calculation. When the meeting concluded, Daniel Brooks asked me to stay behind for a moment. Once Vanessa had left with a tight-lipped promise to talk soon, directed at me. He closed his office door and sat across from me. "There's more," he said quietly. "Michael left this for you with instructions to give it to you privately." After the initial reading, he handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in my son's familiar handwriting. My hands trembled as I took it. "Should I?" I gestured to the envelope. "Take it home," Daniel advised. "Read it when you're alone and ready." "And Helen?" he added, his professional demeanor softening. Michael knew exactly what he was doing. Trust that. I nodded, slipping the envelope into my purse as I rose to leave. In the lobby, I found Vanessa engaged in an intense phone conversation, her back turned to the receptionist's desk. I paused, out of sight but within earshot. Completely blindsided me, she was saying, her voice low but furious. The house, the cars, even access to Ethan Carter's education fund. No, I don't think he suspected anything. Must have been his mother's influence. Of course, I'm going to fight it, Eric. I've put in 11 years with this family. I deserve more than some vacation property and insurance money. I retreated silently, taking the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator where Vanessa might see me. My mind was racing with questions, but one thing was becoming increasingly clear. Michael had anticipated something I was only beginning to understand. Back in my own modest home with Ethan still at school, I finally opened the envelope with shaking hands. Inside was a single page of stationery from Michael's law office. "Mom, if you're reading this, the unthinkable has happened. I'm so sorry to leave you with this burden, but there's no one I trust more. My marriage has been failing for some time. What began as growing apart has evolved into something more concerning. I've discovered things about Vanessa that make me fear for Ethan's future emotional well-being and for your security. I've arranged things to protect you both. The house cars and money aren't really for you. They're tools to ensure Ethan has one stable, loving parent figure when I'm gone. Vanessa will fight this. She'll try to manipulate you. Don't let her know what you know or suspect. Watch and wait. Document everything regarding Ethan's care. Daniel has the rest of my instructions and evidence I've gathered. Hell help when the time is right. I love you, Mom. You taught me to see people clearly and to plan ahead. I'm counting on those same qualities now to protect my son. Michael." I pressed the letter to my chest, fresh tears spilling down my cheeks. Even facing his own mortality, Michael had been thinking of protecting his son and me. Now I understood my mission clearly. For my son's sake, for Ethan Carter's future, I would need to become something I'd never been before. A strategic opponent in what was clearly going to become a battle of wills and manipulation with Vanessa Hale. It was time to put my psychology background to its most important use. Yet Michael's will reveals shocking arrangements that leave Vanessa furious and me stunned. Why did my son secretly transfer so many assets to my name? His private letter confirms my worst suspicions about Vanessa and gives me a sacred mission. Protect Ethan at all costs. But to outsmart my calculating daughter-in-law, I'll need to hide what I know and play a longer game than she expects. "Grandma, when is Dad coming back?" Ethan's innocent question over breakfast. 3 days after the funeral pierced my heart. At 9 years old, he was old enough to understand death conceptually, but still young enough to hope for impossible miracles. "Oh, sweetheart," I said gently, setting down my coffee cup and taking his small hand in mine. "Remember what we talked about. Daddy can't come back." His body stopped working because of the aneurysm in his brain. Ethan nodded, eyes downcast. "I know, but sometimes I forget when I first wake up." I keep thinking, hell, come make pancakes like on Saturdays. I swallowed past the lump in my throat. I know it's hard. I miss him too, every minute. Would you like me to make pancakes on Saturdays now? They wouldn't be the same. He mumbled, then quickly added. But I'd like that anyway. I was staying at Michael's house, my house now, according to the will, to help care for Ethan, while Vanessa dealt with important paperwork, as Shed vaguely explained. In reality, I suspected she was meeting with her own attorney to contest Michael's will, but I kept this thought to myself. After dropping Ethan at school, where his teacher had been wonderfully supportive, I returned to the house to find Vanessa waiting in the kitchen. She'd let herself in with her key, dressed in a sleek black pantsuit that conveyed businesslike mourning. Helen, she greeted me with a kiss on the cheek that didn't reach her eyes. I'm glad you're here. We need to talk about arrangements going forward. Of course, I replied, maintaining the polite, somewhat deferential demeanor I decided to adopt as my strategy. Would you like some coffee, please? She seated herself at the kitchen island, watching as I moved around what was technically now my kitchen. This is also overwhelming. The paperwork, the accounts, the decisions. I can only imagine, I murmured, sympathetically playing my role while remembering the angry phone conversation I'd overheard. How can I help? Vanessa Hale's perfectly made-up face registered brief surprise at my accommodating tone, quickly replaced by calculated warmth. You're so kind, Helen. Actually, I've been thinking about what makes the most sense for everyone, especially Ethan Carter. Here it comes, I thought, keeping my expression open and receptive. This house has so many memories of Michael. She continued, her voice taking on a practiced tremor. Every room reminds Ethan of what he's lost. It might be healthier for him, for both of us, to make a fresh start somewhere else. I nodded thoughtfully while placing a mug of coffee before her. You're considering moving. I found a lovely condo downtown near the cultural district. Excellent schools nearby, walking distance to the art museum and library. She stirred her coffee deliberately. The thing is, Helen, with the way Michael arranged things, he'll need your cooperation. Oh. I tilted my head questioningly, as if I hadn't already anticipated this conversation. The will situation is obviously some kind of mistake or misunderstanding. Michael would never have intentionally put me in such a difficult position. Her tone hardened slightly before she caught herself. I've spoken with an attorney who suggests we could avoid lengthy legal proceedings if you'd simply transfer the house to me as Michael would have wanted. I see, I said slowly. And what does your attorney say about the fact that Michael updated his will only 4 months ago, specifically to make these arrangements? A flash of irritation crossed her face before her mask of reasonable grief returned. Michael wasn't himself in recent months. He was working too hard, stressed about cases. He wasn't thinking clearly about our family's best interests. I nodded, as if considering this explanation. That must have been difficult for you both. It was, she sighed dramatically, which is why I believe he would want us to correct this oversight. Now, for Ethan's sake, the invocation of Ethan's welfare. Her trump card was deployed exactly as it expected. I took a deliberate sip of coffee, giving myself time to formulate my response. I understand your concern, I said finally, but making hasty decisions during grief isn't wise. Perhaps we should give ourselves some time to adjust before making major changes. Vanessa's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course you need time, but the condo I found won't be available for long. It would be so much easier for Ethan if we could settle things quickly and let him start healing in a new environment. I recognized the sales tactic, creating artificial urgency to force a quick decision. My years teaching negotiation strategies to psychology students hadn't been wasted. Why don't we ask Ethan Carter how he feels about moving? I suggested mildly. He might find comfort in staying in the home where he has so many memories of his father. Children don't always know what's best for them, Vanessa Hale countered smoothly. That's why adults make these decisions. Besides, he's already dealing with enough emotional turmoil. I noted how skillfully Shed positioned herself as the protective parent, while subtly suggesting I would harm Ethan by consulting him about his own feelings. Michael's letter rustled in my memory. "She'll try to manipulate you." "You're probably right," I conceded, watching relief flash across her features. "Let me think about it all for a few days. This has been such a shock." Of course, she agreed clearly, believing she'd made progress. "Take the weekend." "But Helen," she added, her voice dropping to a confidential tone, "I'm worried about finances with the way things stand. Michael handled everything, and now I'm finding credit card bills, the mortgage that was now my responsibility according to the will." But I kept this observation to myself. I'd be happy to help review the household accounts I offered, seizing the opportunity. Perhaps we could go through everything together. "That's not necessary," she said quickly. "I just meant that resolving the house situation would help me access the equity we've built for Ethan's education and well-being, the education fund that Michael had specifically placed under my control as trustee." I wondered if she realized how transparent her motivations were to someone trained to observe human behavior. "Let's talk more next week," I suggested, rising, as if our conversation had reassured rather than alarmed me. I should get some rest before picking up Ethan from school. After Vanessa left, I sat alone in the quiet house, mentally reviewing our interaction. She clearly believed I was a grief-stricken, somewhat passive older woman who could be maneuvered into surrendering what Michael had entrusted to me. For now, I needed her to continue believing exactly that. I picked up my phone and called Daniel Brooks. "I need to understand exactly what evidence Michael collected," I told him without preamble, "and how we can gather more. This is going to be a longer game than I anticipated. Vanessa wastes no time trying to manipulate me into signing over the house. Using Ethan's welfare as emotional leverage, playing the role of a compliant grief adult mother-in-law, I appear to consider her proposal while secretly planning my counter-offensive. Michael warned me she would fight dirty, but he didn't know his mother was ready to fight smarter. The performance has begun, and I intend to be the better actor in this dangerous production. "Grandma, Mom says I have to go with her to San Diego, California next weekend, but I don't want to." Ethan Carter's troubled face looked up at me as I tucked him into bed 1 week after Michael's funeral. This was the first I'd heard of any San Diego trip, which immediately raised red flags. San Diego. I kept my voice casual while my mind raced. "That sounds like an adventure." Ethan shook his head, clutching his stuffed dinosaur tighter. "She says her friend Eric Landon has a boat and, well, stay at a fancy hotel, but I have my science project due Monday, and Dad always helped with my projects." I smoothed his hair gently. "Have you told your mom about the science project? She said I can skip it. That teachers understand when your dad dies." His voice caught on the word, but Dad wouldn't want me to skip it. "He always said commitments are important. Your father was right about that." I agreed, making a mental note of this conversation. "Let me talk to your mom tomorrow. Maybe we can work something out." After Ethan fell asleep, I called Daniel Brooks at his home number, which he'd provided for urgent matters. San Diego Daniel's voice sharpened when I explained the situation. "With Eric Landon, you know him?" I asked, surprised. "He's the real estate developer I mentioned in our meeting yesterday, the one Michael had concerns about." Daniel's tone was carefully measured. "Helen, did you install the home monitoring system I recommended?" "Yes, the technician finished today. Cameras in the common areas and the security system that sends alerts to my phone." I had followed Daniel's advice to improve home security, though the underlying purpose was different than what a grieving family might normally install. "Good. That recording capability may prove valuable." He paused. "I'm sending you some materials from Michael's private file tomorrow by courier. Don't open the package where anyone might see you." The next morning, after taking Ethan to school, I received a sealed manila envelope. Inside were printouts of text messages between Vanessa Hale and someone saved in her phone as EL dated from various points over the past 8 months. Michael had apparently gained access to her phone records through means I chose not to question given his legal background. The messages painted a damning picture, an affair that had begun almost a year ago. Plans made and broken. Complaints about Michael working late about being trapped in her marriage, references to Ethan as the complication in their relationship plans. Most disturbing were exchanges from just 2 months ago. "EL, how long are we going to keep this limbo going? You said you were ready to leave, Vanessa. Patience. Michael's name is on everything important. Need to get financials in better position first. Working on it. Vanessa, the Nassau, Bahamas property isn't going to wait forever. Perfect opportunity for fresh start. Vanessa, trust me, few more months, max. Everything will fall into place." I sat back, hands shaking slightly. These weren't just messages documenting an affair. They revealed Vanessa had been planning to leave Michael but wanted to secure financial assets first. Had Michael discovered these messages and changed his will in response? Is that why Vanessa had been so shocked by the provisions? Another document in the package was a private investigator's report Michael had commissioned containing photographs of Vanessa Hale and Eric Landon entering a hotel together. Expense reports showing gifts he'd purchased for her, and background information on Landon's business dealings, some of which appeared ethically questionable. The final item was a handwritten note from Michael to Daniel Brooks dated just 3 weeks before his death. "Dan, enclosed is everything I've gathered. Not sure what my next steps should be. Confronting her could jeopardize my access to Ethan if things go badly. Need to protect him above all. Well, meet you next Thursday to discuss options." Michael had died on Tuesday. The meeting never happened. Armed with this knowledge, I approached my conversation with Vanessa about the San Diego trip strategically. I waited until she came to pick up Ethan's weekend bag that Friday afternoon. "Ethan mentioned you're planning a trip to San Diego." I kept my tone light, curious rather than confrontational. "Just a quick weekend getaway," Vanessa replied, checking her designer watch. "Good for him to have a distraction. He's worried about missing his science project deadline," I mentioned casually. "You know how Michael always emphasized academics?" Vanessa's smile tightened. "A weekend off won't hurt his GPA. Helen, the school psychologist, actually recommended new experiences to process grief." I nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense, though. I wonder if a boat trip with Eric Landon might be a bit much so soon after losing his father. Ethan seems anxious about it." Her eyes narrowed slightly at my mention of Eric's name. "Ethan will be fine. Children are adaptable." "They certainly are." I agreed, though. Sometimes they need familiar routines during trauma. "I'd be happy to keep him here to finish his project if that would help your plans." I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes, weighing the freedom of a child-free weekend against her need to maintain the appearance of devoted motherhood. "That's thoughtful, but unnecessary," she said finally. "This trip is about mother-son bonding." "Of course," I conceded, then added innocently, "Oh, I've been meaning to ask. Do you know the password to Michael's home computer?" Ethan Carter was hoping to find some photos for a memory book his counselor suggested. "I don't keep track of Michael's passwords," she said dismissively. "Have Daniel Brooks check his office files." Another note from my growing mental catalog. Vanessa Hale claimed not to know Michael's passwords information that most spouses would share. I'd already found his password notebook in his desk drawer, but her response was telling. "One more thing," I said as she turned to leave. "Ethan's teacher wants parent volunteers for their field trip to the Science Museum next Wednesday. Since I'm not officially a parent, I thought you might want to sign up. The children who've lost parents apparently find these outings especially difficult." It was a test one I suspected she would fail. "Wednesday, I have an all-day spa appointment. I've been waiting weeks for mental health care," she added with a performative sigh. "You understand?" "Of course," I said sympathetically. "Self-care is important during grief. I'll explain to Ethan's teacher." After she left with a promise to return Sunday evening with Ethan, I immediately called Daniel. She's taking Ethan to San Diego, California with Eric Landon. I reported I need to document this trip carefully. Already on it, Daniel assured me. I've engaged the same investigator Michael used. We'll have photographs of everything. San Diego is actually helpful for our purposes. It shows her priorities clearly. And if Ethan is upset by the trip, I couldn't keep the worry from my voice. Document his emotional state when he returns. Have him talk to his counselor about it. Every reaction becomes evidence. Helen. I hated viewing my grandson's pain as evidence, but I understood the necessity. Building a case for Ethan's well-being meant carefully cataloging everything that threatened it. As I prepared for a weekend alone in Michael's house, my house, I thought about the theater production unfolding around us all. Vanessa playing the grieving widow while planning escapes with her lover. Me playing the supportive mother-in-law while gathering ammunition. Even Ethan unconsciously providing crucial insights through his innocent comments and reactions. The only person not performing was Michael, whose absence remained the most powerful presence in our lives. I touched the framed photo of him on the mantel. Watching. Michael, I whispered, just like you asked me to, and am learning more than Vanessa realizes. Disturbing evidence reveals Vanessa has been planning her escape for months, viewing Ethan as a complication in her affair with Eric Landon. As she whisks my grandson off to San Diego with her lover, I maintain my performance as the supportive mother-in-law while carefully documenting every poor parenting decision. Michael had begun building a case before his death. Now, I'm continuing his work gathering evidence that will eventually protect Ethan Carter from a mother who sees him as an afterthought in her new life plans. Ethan returned from San Diego with sunburned shoulders, a stomach ache from too much ice cream, and emotional withdrawal that broke my heart. He trudged into the house Sunday evening hours later than Vanessa Hale had promised to bring him back. His small face tight with exhaustion. "How was your trip, sweetheart?" I asked, kneeling to his level as Vanessa texted rapidly on her phone behind him. Ethan shrugged, eyes downcast. "The boat made me sick." "He's being dramatic," Vanessa interjected without looking up from her screen. "It was just a little motion sickness. The resort was 5-star. The weather was perfect. He had a wonderful time." Ethan's expression told a different story, but he remained silent, casting a quick glance at his mother before mumbling. "Can I go to my room?" "Of course," I said gently. "I'll bring up some ginger tea for your tummy in a few minutes." As he trudged upstairs, I noticed he wasn't carrying his backpack. Did Ethan forget his school bag? Vanessa waved dismissively. "It got wet on the boat. Nothing important in it. His science project materials were in that bag I pointed out carefully, keeping accusation from my tone. He can get an extension. I'll write a note." She finally looked up from her phone, her expression daring me to challenge her. "Eric Landon sends his regards, by the way. He was disappointed you couldn't join us." The brazen mention of her lover made my stomach clench, but I maintained my facade of oblivious politeness. "How thoughtful. I hope you enjoyed your weekend." "Very much," she replied, a hint of triumph in her smile. "Eric has wonderful connections in San Diego. We're considering investment opportunities there." "How nice," I murmured, making a mental note of this casual admission of future plans. I should check on Ethan. Upstairs, I found my grandson sitting on his bed, staring at a photo of Michael on his nightstand. The room was exactly as he'd left it Friday. Homework still spread across his desk. Work he clearly hadn't touched all weekend. "Want to tell me about the trip?" I asked gently, sitting beside him. His lower lip trembled. Mom was on her phone the whole time. She and Eric talked about boring grown-up stuff and left me with the hotel babysitter even at night. My heart sank. The whole night. He nodded miserably. 2 nights. The babysitter fell asleep watching TV, and I got scared because I didn't know where I was when I woke up. I called Mom's room, but she didn't answer. I kept my expression neutral while inwardly seething. That must have been frightening. Eric has a big boat, but he wouldn't let me touch anything. He said, kids mess things up. Ethan Carter picked at a loose thread on his comforter, and Mom laughed when he said that even though Dad always let me help steer our little boat. Each detail was another piece of evidence, another example of Vanessa Hale prioritizing her new relationship over her son's emotional needs. I made careful mental notes to record later in the journal Daniel Brooks had suggested I keep. "Did you tell Mom you were scared or upset?" I asked. Ethan shook his head. She was having fun. She told me in the car that it's important for her to be happy again, and I shouldn't make things harder by complaining. The manipulation of making a 9-year-old responsible for his mother's happiness, especially one grieving his father, sent a surge of protective anger through me. I pushed it down, focusing instead on comforting Ethan. "It's okay to have feelings about things," I told him, pulling him gently against my side. "Even when grown-ups are having fun. Your feelings matter too." He leaned into me, his small body relaxing slightly. "Dad always asked about my feelings." "I know, sweetheart. I know." After getting Ethan settled with tea for his stomach and helping him salvage what we could of his science project, I documented the evening's revelations in my journal, adding them to the growing catalog of concerning behaviors. Daniel had explained that establishing patterns was crucial. Any single incident could be explained away, but consistent patterns of neglect or poor judgment would build our case. Over the next 2 weeks, those patterns emerged with disturbing clarity. Vanessa began staying out late without explanation, leaving Ethan with me more frequently. She missed his school conference, sending me in her place with a vague excuse about estate meetings. She forgot to refill his asthma medication, necessitating an emergency pharmacy run when he had a mild attack during soccer practice. Each incident was meticulously documented in my journal. Each one showed a mother increasingly detached from her son's daily needs. While I stepped in to fill the void, I was careful not to criticize Vanessa directly to Ethan, focusing instead on providing the stability and attention he craved. The security system I'd installed captured telling moments. Vanessa bringing Eric's land into the house late one evening, both slightly intoxicated, unaware that Ethan was awake, and witnessed their intimate behavior in the kitchen. Vanessa instructing Ethan to remember to tell Grandma you had a great time today after a rushed outing where she'd spent most of the time on business calls. Multiple instances of her promising Ethan she'd attend his activities, then canceling at the last minute. My performance as the supportive, somewhat naive mother-in-law continued throughout. I offered to help with Ethan Carter's care in ways that seemed generous rather than strategic. I expressed understanding when Vanessa Hale claimed grief brain for forgotten commitments. I avoided confrontation when she made thinly veiled comments about moving forward with selling the house. "Helen, we need to discuss the house situation," she said one evening, 3 weeks after Michael's death. She'd arrived unexpectedly while I was helping Ethan with homework, dressed for what was clearly a dinner date rather than a mothersome evening. "Of course," I replied amiably. "I've been meaning to ask what items you'd like to keep when I move in permanently next month." Her perfectly shaped eyebrows arched in surprise. "Move in? I thought we agreed the house should be sold." "Oh, I don't recall agreeing to that," I said mildly. "Actually, I've been thinking it's best for Ethan to maintain stability right now. His therapist mentioned how important familiar environments are during grief." Her expression hardened momentarily before she forced a concerned smile. "I'm worried about you, Helen. This house is far too large for you to manage alone, and the financial burden of the mortgage, utilities, maintenance." Michael left the house free and clear, I mentioned casually, watching her reaction. "No mortgage to worry about, and I'm more capable than I look." All those years managing a university department taught me quite a bit about handling complex responsibilities. Something shifted in her assessment of me, a recalculation that I could almost see happening behind her eyes. I'd revealed myself as slightly more formidable than she'd assumed, yet still maintained my helpful, non-threatening demeanor. "We'll discuss it more later," she said finally. "I need to run. Important dinner meeting." Ethan has already had dinner, and he should be in bed by 9 Hours. After she left, I sat with Ethan at the kitchen table, helping him rebuild the science project whose materials had been lost in San Diego. As he carefully glued pieces of his solar system model together, he looked up suddenly. "Grandma, are you going to live here now instead of Mom?" The question caught me off guard. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" He shrugged, focusing intently on positioning Mars at the correct distance from his styrofoam sun. "Mom told someone on the phone that you're trying to take the house from her. She said you were being selfish." I chose my words carefully. "Your dad wanted to make sure we all had safe places to live. Sometimes grown-ups disagree about the details." "I want you to stay," he said simply. "You help me with homework, and remember my medicine, and make real food instead of just ordering pizza." His straightforward assessment of the situation, so innocent yet so perceptive, reinforced my determination. This wasn't just about following Michael's wishes anymore. It was about protecting a child who clearly recognized, even at 9, the difference between performative parenting and genuine care. I'll do my very best to stay close no matter what I promised him. It was the only promise I could make with absolute certainty, while the larger battle continued to unfold around us. The aftermath of the San Diego trip reveals disturbing patterns in Vanessa Hale's parenting as she increasingly neglects Ethan Carter for her relationship with Eric Landon. I carefully document each instance while maintaining my supportive facade. Ethan's innocent observations confirm what I already know. Vanessa sees him as an inconvenience in her new life plans. The house becomes our first battlefield, but the war is really about something far more precious. A vulnerable boy who deserves better than a mother who remembers him only when it serves her purposes. I'm thinking of taking Ethan to my parents in New Mexico for a few weeks. Vanessa's announcement over morning coffee nearly 4 weeks after Michael's death seemed casual, but the timing set off immediate alarm bells. I had just informed her that Daniel Brooks needed to meet with us again regarding additional estate matters. New Mexico. I kept my voice neutral while stirring my coffee. That's quite a distance. What about Ethan's school? Vanessa waved dismissively. He can miss a few weeks. Children are resilient. Michael's favorite phrase, "Children are resilient," sounded hollow, coming from her lips, a convenient excuse rather than a thoughtful observation. "When were you thinking of going?" I asked, mentally calculating how this might align with the increasingly urgent timeline Daniel had mentioned. "Next week, ideally," she checked her expensive watch. "My parents have been begging to see him, and frankly, I could use the support system. Being a sudden single mother is overwhelming." I bit back the observation that she'd been essentially a single mother by choice for months, given how often she delegated Ethan's care to Michael and me even before the affair began. "That's understandable," I said instead. Though I wonder if such a big trip might be difficult for Ethan right now. He's just getting back into his school routine, and his grief counselor mentioned consistency is important. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "Are you suggesting I don't know what's best for my own son?" "Not at all." I backpedal, maintaining my non-threatening persona. Just thinking out loud. "I'm sure you've considered everything carefully." "I have." Her tone softened, becoming almost conspiratorial. "Actually, Helen, I wanted to discuss something important with you. Could we have dinner tonight, just the two of us? I'll have my assistant watch Ethan." I raised an eyebrow. "Your assistant, Eric Landon's assistant," she corrected smoothly. "Melissa is wonderful with children. She's helped with Ethan before." Another detail for my journal. Vanessa Hale was leaving Ethan Carter with her lover's assistant rather than his grandmother who lived 15 minutes away. I made a mental note to ask Ethan about these previous occasions. "I'd be happy to watch him," I offered. "But dinner sounds lovely. What did you want to discuss?" Everything, she said vaguely. "The house, Ethan's future, how we move forward from here." I think I've come up with a solution that works for everyone. Her confident smile suggested she believed she'd formulated an irresistible proposal. I agreed to meet at an upscale restaurant in the downtown arts district at 6:30 p.m., curious what strategy she'd devised. The restaurant she'd chosen was deliberately impressive, the kind with minimalist decor, tiny portions, and prices that made you wince. Vanessa was already seated when I arrived, looking elegant in a designer dress that somehow managed to suggest tasteful mourning while remaining fashionable. "Helen, thank you for coming." She greeted me, air-kissing my cheek. "I ordered us a bottle of Mott and Chandon. Michael always said it was your favorite." It wasn't. Michael knew perfectly well I preferred a simple Chardonnay, but the manufactured intimacy was part of her performance. "How thoughtful," I murmured, settling into my chair, though I rarely indulged even before Michael's passing. She poured champagne anyway, raising her glass in a toast to new beginnings and solutions. I sipped politely, waiting as she established the atmosphere she wanted. Convivial, generous, warmly intimate. The manipulation was textbook. Create a pleasing environment, establish rapport, suggest shared understanding before making your pitch. "Helen," she began after our appetizers arrived. "These past weeks have been so difficult for all of us, losing Michael, trying to help Ethan cope, dealing with all the practical matters." I nodded encouragingly, playing my role. "I've been thinking about what truly matters," she continued, her voice taking on a practiced sincerity. "Family security, peace of mind, and I think I found a way for all of us to have what we need." "I'm listening," I said, cutting a small piece of my overpriced scallop. "You and I both know Michael's will has created complications." She delicately sipped her champagne. "The house, the vehicles, the accounts. It's all rather awkward, isn't it? Not at all what Michael would have wanted if he'd been thinking clearly." I remained silent, letting her continue her pitch uninterrupted. "I've spoken with an excellent estate attorney who specializes in these situations. He believes we could easily contest the will based on Michael's mental state in those final months, the stress he was under, the medications for his previous heart condition. It wouldn't be difficult to demonstrate diminished capacity." My heart clenched at how casually she suggested invalidating my son's final wishes, but I kept my expression neutral. "I see, but litigation is so unpleasant," she continued smoothly. "Creates divisions, drags on for months, or even years. Not what Ethan Carter needs right now. Absolutely not." I agreed, wondering where this performance was heading. She leaned forward, lowering her voice conspiratorially. "So I've come up with a better solution, one that gives us both what we want without any messy legal battles." "And what would that be?" I asked, genuinely curious about her strategy. "You transfer the house and vehicles back to me as Michael's widow," she explained, as if offering a tremendous favor. "In exchange, I'll guarantee you can see Ethan regularly. Perhaps every other weekend, major holidays. I'll even put it in writing." The breathtaking audacity of her offer, essentially ransoming my own grandson, almost made me lose my carefully maintained composure. She was proposing I surrender everything Michael had legally left me in exchange for permission to see Ethan rights I already had as his grandmother. "That's quite a proposition," I managed, taking another sip of champagne to hide my reaction. "I know it's so generous," she agreed, misinterpreting my hesitation as consideration. "Most women in my position would fight for everything, but I value your relationship with Ethan. And frankly, I could use the help occasionally." "Occasionally," I echoed, picking up on the telling word choice. "Well, single motherhood is demanding," she sighed dramatically. "And I do have my career to consider. Plus, Eric Landon and I—" She stopped herself, recalibrating. "That is, I'll eventually want to rebuild my personal life. Having guaranteed childcare arrangements would be tremendously helpful." There it was, the real motivation. Not Ethan's well-being, but convenient childcare arrangements that would allow her to pursue her relationship with Eric unencumbered. "What about Ethan's trust fund?" I asked innocently. "Would that remain as Michael arranged it?" A flash of irritation crossed her features before she smiled again. That's unnecessarily complicated too. As his mother, I should have control over his educational expenses. Children's needs change require flexibility. They certainly do. I agreed, thinking of all the ways Ethan's needs had been ignored in recent weeks. So she said, reaching into her purse and withdrawing a folded document. I took the liberty of having my attorney draft a simple agreement. You transfer the assets back where they belong. I guarantee your visitation rights. Clean, simple, everyone wins. She slid the paper across the table with the confidence of someone who believed they held all the cards. I took it, scanning the language that would effectively undo everything Michael had arranged to protect Ethan and me. This is quite thorough, I commented, buying time while formulating my response. And what about New Mexico? Would Ethan and I still have our visits if you move? About that, she said, her expression turning regretful. The New Mexico trip might become more permanent. Eric Landon has development opportunities there, excellent private schools for Ethan Carter. It would be a fresh start for everyone, and conveniently far from me and anyone else who knew Michael or might question her parenting. The pieces of her plan were falling perfectly into place in my understanding. I'll need to think about this, I said, folding the document and placing it in my own purse, and perhaps have Daniel Brooks review it since he's familiar with Michael's wishes. Her smile tightened. I wouldn't involve Daniel. He's rather old-fashioned about these matters. My attorney assures me this is completely standard. I nodded thoughtfully. Even so, such an important decision deserves careful consideration. Michael always taught me not to sign anything without proper review. She couldn't argue with invoking Michael's advice without seeming disrespectful, so she merely smiled and signaled for the check. Of course, take a few days. But Helen, she added, her voice taking on a subtle edge. This really is the best solution for everyone. Fighting me on this would only hurt Ethan in the long run. The thinly veiled threat hung between us as she paid for our expensive meal with what I suspected was Michael's credit card. I maintained my mask of thoughtful consideration, thanking her for dinner and promising to give her proposal the attention it deserves. As I drove home, my hands finally allowed themselves to shake on the steering wheel. The audacity, the manipulation, the casual way she planned to separate Ethan from his remaining connections to Michael. It all confirmed what I'd been documenting for weeks. I called Daniel from my car. She's planning to take Ethan to New Mexico permanently, I said without preamble. And she's offered me a devil's bargain to get the house and accounts. Perfect, Daniel replied, surprising me. This is exactly what we needed. Bring the document to my office first thing tomorrow. It's time to move to the next phase. Over an expensive dinner, Vanessa Hale reveals her true colors, offering me a devil's bargain. Surrender everything Michael left me in exchange for permission to see my own grandson. Her plan to move Ethan to New Mexico with her lover shows how completely she intends to erase Michael from their lives. Little does she know her transparent manipulation has handed us exactly the evidence we need. Daniel Brooks' cryptic response suggests the game is about to change, and Vanessa has no idea what's coming. She actually put it in writing. I can hardly believe it. Daniel shook his head in amazement as he reviewed the document Vanessa had given me. We sat in his office early the next morning, coffee growing cold as we dissected her proposition. This is essentially a confession, he continued, highlighting sections with a yellow marker. She's explicitly stating, she'll allow you to see Ethan Carter only if you transfer assets to her that are legally yours. That's textbook coercion. And this part about New Mexico, I pointed to the clause mentioning reasonable visitation, regardless of primary residence's location. Establishes premeditation for removing Ethan from his support system and familiar environment during grief. Daniel Brooks added another yellow highlight. Combined with the evidence we've gathered of her parenting patterns, this creates a compelling narrative. I leaned back in my chair, processing the implications. So what happens now? Daniel set down his marker expression, turning serious. It's time to execute the contingency plan Michael put in place. He hoped it wouldn't be necessary, but he prepared for this exact scenario. From his desk drawer, Daniel withdrew a sealed envelope marked Emergency Protocol in Michael's handwriting. My heart constricted at the sight of my son's familiar script. Michael left detailed instructions about when and how to proceed if Vanessa Hale's behavior threatened Ethan's well-being or attempted to separate him from you. Daniel opened the envelope carefully. The key component is a petition for emergency custody modification. Custody modification? I repeated, stunned. Michael wanted me to seek custody of Ethan. Temporary custody initially, Daniel clarified. Based on documented evidence of parental neglect and the child's best interest during grief, Michael believed, and I concur, that a judge would likely award you temporary guardianship while a more permanent arrangement is determined. My hands trembled slightly. The responsibility Michael had entrusted to me was enormous. Not just documenting Vanessa's behavior, but potentially taking over Ethan's primary care. I'm 66. Daniel. Would a court really consider me as a guardian over Ethan's mother age isn't disqualifying, especially given your demonstrated involvement in his life. And remember, we're not alleging. Vanessa is an unfit mother in the traditional sense. We're demonstrating that her current priorities and choices are detrimental to Ethan's emotional well-being during a critical period of grief and adjustment. Daniel laid out the evidence we'd accumulated. My detailed journal documenting Vanessa's absences and Ethan's reactions. The home security footage showing multiple concerning incidents. Statements from Ethan's teachers about missed conferences and incomplete homework. Notes from his grief counselor about regression and anxiety that coincided with Vanessa's increased absences. Photographic evidence of the San Diego trip with Eric Landon while Ethan was left with hotel staff. And now the damning document proposing to use Ethan as leverage. We'll need one more piece, Daniel explained. A neutral third-party evaluation of Ethan's home environment and emotional state. I've arranged for a court-approved child psychologist to interview Ethan tomorrow at his school. Standard procedure in these cases. Nothing that would alarm Vanessa if she heard about it. The methodical way Michael had prepared for this contingency, right down to identifying appropriate psychological evaluators, broke my heart all over again. How long had he been concerned about Vanessa's parenting? How much had he witnessed before deciding such drastic measures might be necessary? When would we file the petition? I asked, trying to focus on practical matters rather than my swirling emotions. Immediately after receiving the psychologist's report, assuming it supports our position, likely within 48 hours? Daniel's expression softened slightly. Helen, are you prepared for what comes next? Vanessa will not take this lying down. She'll be furious, possibly vindictive. I thought of Ethan's small face when he returned from San Diego. The way he'd confided that his mother had left him with strangers overnight, how he'd clutched his father's photo while trying not to cry. I thought of Michael, who had foreseen this situation and trusted me to protect his son when he no longer could. I'm prepared, I said firmly. What's our next step? Maintain your current approach with Vanessa. Don't let on that anything has changed. If she presses for an answer about her proposition, tell her you're still considering it and have questions about some details. Daniel began organizing documents into a legal folder. Meanwhile, I'll prepare the emergency petition and coordinate with the psychologist. As I left Daniel's office, my phone buzzed with a text from Vanessa. Need your answer by tomorrow. New Mexico arrangements pending. Important opportunity for Ethan's future. The transparent attempt to create artificial urgency only strengthened my resolve. I typed a carefully calibrated response. Still reviewing. I have some questions about the visitation schedule. Can we discuss tomorrow evening? Her reply came immediately. Fine. 6:30 p.m. at the house. We'll have Eric Landon's attorney present to answer any concerns. Eric's attorney, not Michael's, not a neutral party, not even her own independent counsel. Another telling detail for our documentation. I spent the afternoon with Ethan after school helping with homework and listening as he reluctantly described an incident that morning when Vanessa had forgotten to pack his lunch, then bared him for calling to remind her because she was in an important meeting. I recorded these details in my journal immediately after he went upstairs to play, noting his dejected posture and the way he'd minimized his mother's reaction, clearly accustomed to managing her emotions rather than his own. That evening, I received an unexpected call from Daniel. The school psychologist met with Ethan today during lunch. He informed me without preamble. Her preliminary findings are significant. Ethan demonstrated elevated anxiety when discussing his home environment, particular concern about being sent away to New Mexico, and clear attachment to you as his primary source of emotional support. Is that enough? I asked, hope rising cautiously. Combined with our other evidence. Yes, I'm filing the emergency petition first thing tomorrow morning. The judge I've requested typically rules on these matters within 24 hours. Should I tell Ethan Carter anything I worried about preparing him for the potential upheaval? Not yet, Daniel Brooks advised. Children his age struggle with keeping sensitive information private. For now, maintain normal routines. If the judge rules in our favor, we'll have a child specialist help explain the situation to him appropriately. I slept fitfully that night, torn between hope that Ethan might be protected from Vanessa Hale's neglect and anxiety about the conflict that would inevitably erupt. By morning, my resolve had strengthened. This wasn't about my preferences or even about honoring Michael's wishes anymore. It was about a vulnerable child whose mother was making choices that compounded rather than helped his grief. Daniel called at 10:25 a.m. The petition has been filed. Judge Paula Grant has scheduled an emergency hearing for tomorrow at 8:30 a.m. Vanessa will be served notice this afternoon. So soon. I hadn't expected things to move so quickly. Judge Paula Grant takes child welfare cases seriously, especially when there's evidence of potential parental flight risk. Vanessa's New Mexico plans raised red flags. I thought about my scheduled 6:30 p.m. meeting with Vanessa and Eric Landon's attorney that evening. Should I still meet with Vanessa tonight as planned? Absolutely not, Daniel said firmly. Once she served the court papers, you should have no direct contact except through legal representatives. Go to a hotel tonight if necessary. She'll likely be extremely volatile when she realizes what's happening. What about Ethan's worry for my grandson overrode all other concerns? The petition includes a provision for Ethan to remain in his current home environment with you present until the hearing. The server will explain that to Vanessa. Daniel paused. Helen, this is going to get complicated quickly. Are you absolutely certain you're prepared? I thought of Michael's letter, of his trust in me, of Ethan's increasingly anxious behavior. I've never been more certain of anything in my life. Vanessa's manipulative proposition becomes the final evidence we need, triggering Michael's emergency protocol, a custody petition I never imagined filing. As court proceedings are set in motion, I prepare for the storm that will erupt when Vanessa discovers her plans are being challenged. Daniel warns me the battle will be fierce, but my resolve is unshakable. For Michael, for Ethan, I'll face whatever comes next. Even as I wonder how my grieving grandson will weather this additional upheaval in his young life. You scheming, manipulative witch! Vanessa's voice exploded through my phone hours after she'd been served with the emergency custody petition. I held the device away from my ear, her rage so incandescent it seemed to radiate through the speaker. How dare you try to steal my son after everything I've done for you? Her words tumbled out in furious bursts. My attorneys will destroy you. You'll never see Ethan Carter again when this is over. Following Daniel Brooks' advice, I remained silent, letting her fury spend itself without engagement. Eventually, she seemed to register my lack of response. Are you there? Say something, she demanded. On the advice of counsel, I can't discuss this matter directly with you, I finally replied, keeping my voice calm and neutral. I'll see you at the hearing tomorrow. You'll regret this, she hissed before the line went dead. I leaned against the kitchen counter, suddenly exhausted. The court server had arrived at precisely 2:30 p.m., delivering the petition papers to Vanessa Hale at her office. Daniel had arranged for Ethan to be with me after school, sparing him from witnessing his mother's inevitable explosion. Now, as evening approached, I faced the challenge of maintaining normalcy for Ethan while preparing for tomorrow's hearing. He sat at the dining room table, focused on a math worksheet, blissfully unaware of the legal storm gathering around him. "Grandma, can we have spaghetti for dinner?" he asked, looking up from his multiplication problems. "The kind with your special sauce." "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, grateful for the distraction of ordinary tasks. "Would you like to help me make it?" As we chopped onions and stirred sauce, I studied my grandson's face, searching for signs of additional stress. Vanessa had called him earlier, her voice tight but controlled, explaining that she had an unexpected work emergency and he would stay with me tonight. Ethan had accepted this explanation without question, accustomed to his mother's frequent absences. Mom sounded mad on the phone. He observed, suddenly sprinkling cheese over his portion of spaghetti. "Is she mad at me?" "No, absolutely not," I assured him quickly. "Grown-ups sometimes get frustrated about work things. It has nothing to do with you." He nodded, seeming relieved, but not entirely convinced. "She said she'd take me to get ice cream tomorrow to make up for missing our dinner. But she forgot last time she promised that." Another small piece of evidence. Broken promises becoming so routine that a 9-year-old had learned to expect disappointment. I added mental notes to my documentation while maintaining an encouraging expression. "Let's enjoy our dinner tonight, and we'll see what tomorrow brings," I suggested gently. I couldn't bring myself to make promises about tomorrow when I knew how completely our lives might change after the hearing. After putting Ethan to bed with extra stories and reassurance, I called Daniel for final preparation. "How's Ethan?" he asked immediately. "Managing," I replied. None of what's happening as far as I can tell. Vanessa Hale called him briefly, but kept her composure. "Good. Children are perceptive, but there's no need for him to shoulder adult concerns." Daniel Brooks' voice took on its professional tone. "For tomorrow, I've prepared a summary document of all evidence for Judge Paula Grant. The psychological evaluation came back strongly supportive of our position." "What should I expect at the hearing?" I asked, trying to prepare myself mentally. "Judge Paula Grant runs a tight courtroom. This is a preliminary emergency hearing, so testimony will be limited. You'll likely be asked about your observations of Ethan Carter's well-being and your capacity to provide temporary care. Vanessa will have opportunity to respond to the allegations. Will Ethan need to appear?" The thought of my grandson being questioned in court made my stomach clench. "No. Judge Paula Grant has reviewed the psychologist's report and specifically excluded Ethan from this initial hearing. If a full custody investigation proceeds, he may eventually speak with Ethan in chambers, but that would be weeks from now." I exhaled in relief. "And Eric Landon, will he be involved?" "Legally no standing. Practically he's paying for Vanessa's high-powered attorney, so his influence will be present." Daniel paused. "Helen, prepare yourself. These hearings can get ugly. Vanessa's likely strategy will be to paint you as a grief-deranged, controlling mother-in-law trying to steal her child." I understand, I said, though. My heart raced at the thought of public accusations. "What matters is Ethan." "Exactly. Focus on that tomorrow. No matter what Vanessa or her attorney claim, remember why we're doing this." Sleep proved elusive that night. I checked on Ethan repeatedly, watching his peaceful breathing and wondering how tomorrow's decision would affect the rest of his childhood. By morning, I was exhausted, but resolute, dressed in a conservative navy suit that Daniel had advised would convey stability and trustworthiness to the court. "Why are you dressed up?" Grandma Ethan asked over breakfast, eyeing my unusual formal attire. "I have an important meeting," I explained, helping him pack his backpack. "Mrs. Coleman from next door will take you to school today, and either Mom or I will pick you up this afternoon." He accepted this with the flexibility of childhood, more concerned about whether his favorite shirt was clean than about the day's unusual arrangements. I hugged him extra tight at Mrs. Coleman's door, wishing I could shield him from the uncertainty ahead. The courthouse was imposingly formal, all marble and echoing hallways. Daniel met me at the entrance, his expression professionally composed, but with worry lines visible around his eyes. Vanessa is already inside with her attorney Martin Blake from Harrington and Cole, one of the most aggressive family law attorneys in the city. I nodded, unsurprised that Eric had secured top legal representation. And our chances, Judge Paula Grant, is fair but cautious. The evidence is compelling, but temporary custody removal is still an extraordinary remedy. Daniel Brooks squeezed my arm reassuringly. Remember, this isn't about winning or losing. It's about ensuring Ethan Carter has proper support during a critical time. Inside the courtroom, Vanessa Hale sat at a table with a sharp-featured man in an expensive suit. She wore a conservative black dress hair, pulled back in a modest style that contrasted sharply with her usual fashionable appearance. The transformation into grieving, devoted widow and mother was complete, down to the framed photo of Michael and Ethan shed placed prominently before her. Her eyes met mine with glacial hatred as I entered, before she quickly adjusted her expression to one of wounded confusion, leaning to whisper something to her attorney. The performance had begun. Judge Paula Grant, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, entered promptly at 8:30 a.m. Her no-nonsense demeanor suggested little patience for dramatics as she reviewed the file before her. This is an emergency hearing regarding temporary custody modification for minor child Ethan Carter, she stated, looking over her reading glasses at both tables. I've reviewed the petition and supporting documentation. Let's proceed efficiently. For the next hour, Daniel presented our case methodically, the documented patterns of neglect, Vanessa's increasing absences, the San Diego trip incidents, the psychological evaluation, and finally, the damning proposition document showing Vanessa's attempt to use Ethan as leverage. Martin Blake countered with equal efficiency, portraying me as an interfering mother-in-law, exploiting a grieving widow's temporary struggles, suggesting my obsessive documentation demonstrated unhealthy fixation, and painting Vanessa as a devoted mother temporarily overwhelmed by extraordinary circumstances. Your Honor, Blake concluded smoothly. Mrs. Carter has kept her grandson overnight precisely 19 times since her son's death at Ms. Hale's request to help during this adjustment period. This doesn't demonstrate neglect. It shows a mother wisely accepting support while processing her grief. The New Mexico opportunity represents a fresh start, not abandonment of support systems. When my turn came to speak directly, I focused on Ethan rather than Vanessa, describing concrete examples of his anxiety, his academic struggles since Michael's death, and the stability I'd attempted to provide. Your Honor, I said, meeting the judge's evaluating gaze, I'm not seeking to replace Vanessa as Ethan's mother. I'm asking for temporary measures to ensure his needs are prioritized during an exceptionally vulnerable time in his development. The evidence suggests that currently other priorities are taking precedence over those needs. Judge Grant asked pointed questions of both sides, her expression revealing nothing of her thoughts. Finally, she announced she would review the evidence in chambers and return with her decision in 1 hour. The 60-minute wait in the courthouse hallway seemed eternal. Vanessa Hale and her attorney conferred in hushed tones at one end while Daniel Brooks and I sat silently at the other. When the bailiff finally called us back, my legs felt lead as I rose to hear the decision that would determine Ethan Carter's immediate future. Judge Paula Grant wasted no time on preliminaries. Having reviewed all evidence and testimony, I find sufficient cause for emergency intervention in the current custody arrangement. She stated, her voice firm and authoritative. Temporary guardianship of minor child Ethan Carter is hereby granted to Helen Carter for a period of 90 days, during which a full evaluation of the family situation will be conducted by court-appointed specialists. I exhaled shakily as she continued outlining the details. Vanessa would have supervised visitation 4 times weekly. Neither party could remove Ethan from the jurisdiction, and a comprehensive family assessment would begin immediately. Across the courtroom, Vanessa's composed facade cracked completely. Her face contorted with fury as she turned to her attorney, whisper-shouting accusations and demands for appeal. Judge Grant observed this reaction with a raised eyebrow before adding a final comment. Ms. Hale, your reaction to this temporary ruling concerns me. I strongly advise you to use the coming evaluation period to demonstrate the mature parenting capacity your son needs, rather than focusing on personal grievances. With a sharp rap of her gavel, she concluded. Court adjourned. As we left the courtroom, Vanessa blocked our path, her carefully applied makeup now streaked with angry tears. This isn't over, she hissed, ignoring her attorney's restraining hand on her arm. You think you've won? You have no idea what's coming. Daniel stepped between us. Ms. Hale, all communications should go through counsel from this point. Well, coordinate Ethan's pickup from school today and arrange the first supervised visitation. As Vanessa was led away by her increasingly concerned attorney, I leaned against the wall, the magnitude of what had just happened washing over me. I had temporary custody of my grandson. Michael's concerns had been validated by a court of law. Ethan would be protected, at least for now. What happens next? I asked Daniel, my voice barely steady. We pick up Ethan from school, explain the situation as gently as possible with the help of his counselor, and begin establishing a stable routine. He touched my shoulders supportively. The hard part is just beginning, Helen, but for today, at least, Ethan is safe. In a tense courtroom showdown, Judge Paula Grant grants me temporary custody of Ethan Carter. After reviewing our compelling evidence, Vanessa Hale's mask of devoted motherhood shatters with the ruling, revealing the rage beneath her calculated performance. As she threatens that this isn't over, I prepare for the challenging task ahead, helping my grieving grandson understand these new arrangements while bracing for whatever counterattack Vanessa is already planning. For now, though, Ethan is protected and Michael's foresight has been vindicated. Grandma, is Mom ever coming back? Ethan's question pierced my heart as we sat on the porch swing 6 weeks after the emergency custody hearing. His small legs dangled, not quite reaching the floor, as he stared at the driveway where Vanessa's car would normally appear for her supervised visits. Visits she had attended only sporadically over the past month and a half. Your mom is going through a difficult time, I answered, carefully choosing words the family therapist had suggested. She loves you, but sometimes adults struggle with big changes. Ethan nodded with a wisdom beyond his 9 years. Like when Dad died and she started staying out late, his perceptions sometimes startled me. Children notice so much more than we give them credit for. Something like that, I agreed, pulling him closer to my side. How are you feeling about everything? He considered this seriously, brow furrowed in concentration. Sad sometimes, but not scared anymore. Scared? I prompted gently. When Mom talked about New Mexico, I was scared all the time, he admitted. I didn't want to leave my school and my friends and you. And I didn't like Eric Landon. He always talked to me like I was a baby or not there at all. Each of these revelations was carefully noted in my ongoing documentation. The court-appointed evaluator had been meeting with Ethan weekly and with me and Vanessa separately. The comprehensive assessment that Judge Paula Grant had ordered was nearing completion, with the final custody hearing scheduled for next week. The week since gaining temporary guardianship had been both challenging and healing. Ethan had initially been confused and upset when we explained the new arrangement, but his counselor had helped frame it as a special time with Grandma while Mom sorts out grown-up problems. The stability of routine regular meals, consistent bedtimes, homework help, and predictable expectations had gradually eased his anxiety. Vanessa's reaction had been volatile and erratic. She attended the first few supervised visits with obvious resentment, spending much of the time on her phone or asking Ethan leading questions about whether he was happy or if I was being mean to him. Then she canceled 2 visits in a row, claiming work emergencies. When she returned, her approach had shifted to bringing expensive gifts and making elaborate promises about future trips and experiences. The most telling visit had been 3 weeks ago, when she arrived with Eric Landon unexpectedly in tow, attempting to circumvent the court order specifying who could be present. When the visitation supervisor refused to allow Eric to join, Vanessa Hale had stormed out, leaving Ethan Carter in tears, and without the visit he'd been anticipating all week, she hadn't come for the past 2 scheduled visits at all. "Do you think you'll feel ready for the talk with the judge next week?" I asked Ethan, referring to the in-chambers conversation and Judge Paula Grant had scheduled. The therapist had been preparing him, explaining that the judge simply wanted to hear his thoughts and feelings, not force him to choose between his mother and grandmother. "I guess so," he replied, kicking his feet rhythmically. "Dr. Karen Reed said I just have to tell the truth about what makes me feel safe and happy." "That's exactly right," I assured him, though my own stomach nodded at the thought of Ethan facing such adult responsibilities. The next day brought an unexpected development. Daniel Brooks called early in the morning, his usually measured tone edged with urgency. Vanessa's attorney just filed a motion to dismiss the custody case. They're requesting an immediate return to the original arrangement with no restrictions. My hand tightened on the phone. On what grounds they're claiming the evidence was manufactured, that you manipulated Ethan into making statements against his mother, and that Vanessa's parenting decisions were reasonable responses to grief. My heart sank. Do they have any chance of succeeding? Ordinarily, I'd say no. Our documentation is too thorough. The psychological evaluation's too clear. Daniel paused. But there's a complication. Eric Landon has connections with Judge Diane Porter, who's been assigned to hear this motion, while Judge Paula Grant is on medical leave. The implications were clear. Money and influence could potentially override weeks of careful evidence gathering and professional evaluations. "What can we do?" I asked, trying to keep panic from my voice. "I'm filing counter motions immediately. But Helen, there's something else you should know. Our investigator reports that Vanessa and Eric have put deposits on property in Nassau, Bahamas, a jurisdiction with limited enforcement of U.S. custody orders." The threat crystallized with horrifying clarity. If Vanessa regained custody, even temporarily, she could potentially take Ethan out of the country to a place where our legal protections would be difficult to enforce. "She wouldn't," I began, then stopped myself. Of course she would. Everything I'd learned about Vanessa in these weeks confirmed she viewed Ethan primarily as an accessory to the life she wanted, not as a vulnerable child with his own needs. "I'm implementing additional safeguards," Daniel Brooks assured me. "I've requested an emergency hearing with Judge Paula Grant upon her return next week. In the meantime, document everything. Any communications from Vanessa Hale, any reactions from Ethan Carter, anything unusual at all." That evening, as Ethan worked on a school project about family traditions, my phone chimed with a text from Vanessa. "We need to talk privately without lawyers. Meet me tomorrow 2 p.m. at Lakeside Park. Come alone or deal's off." I showed the message to Daniel immediately, who advised against meeting her without witnesses. "This is exactly the kind of end run around proper channels that concerns me," he warned. Against his advice, I arranged to meet Vanessa, but not alone. Daniel would be nearby, out of sight but within earshot, and I would record our conversation as permitted by our state's one-party consent laws. The park was nearly empty when I arrived, just a few mothers with toddlers at the distant playground. Vanessa sat on a bench overlooking the river, her designer sunglasses hiding her eyes, her posture rigidly composed. "Thank you for coming," she said, as I approached, her tone unexpectedly subdued. "I imagine your attack dog lawyer advised against it. I'm here because any resolution that helps Ethan is worth exploring," I replied neutrally, taking a seat beside her, but maintaining distance. Vanessa was silent for a long moment, watching the river flow past. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its usual sharp edge. "I'm dropping the custody case." Of all the things I'd expected her to say, this wasn't among them. "What, you heard me?" She removed her sunglasses, revealing eyes ringed with uncharacteristic fatigue. I'm signing over full custody to you. No more court battles, no more supervised visits, no more evaluations and judgments. I studied her face, searching for the manipulation behind this sudden capitulation. Why Eric Landon and I are moving to Nassau, Bahamas next month. He secured development rights for a major resort property. She spoke matter-of-factly as if discussing a change in dinner plans rather than abandoning her child. It's the opportunity of a lifetime. Well, be there at least 3 years establishing the project? And Ethan, I asked though, I already knew the answer. She shrugged slightly. Ethan needs stability, structure, all those things the evaluators keep emphasizing. I can't provide that right now. Not with the demands of relocating and launching a major development. The clinical detachment with which she discussed leaving her son, her only child who had just lost his father, left me momentarily speechless. So you're just walking away? I finally managed. I prefer to think of it as making the mature, responsible choice. Her tone suggested she expected praise for this decision. I'm putting Ethan Carter's needs first by recognizing you're better positioned to meet them right now. Right now? I echoed. For the foreseeable future, she clarified. I'll send support payments, of course, make video calls when possible. Perhaps he could visit during school holidays eventually. The casual way she outlined transitioning from mother to distant relative made my heart ache for Ethan. Yet beneath my sadness was profound relief. Ethan would be spared further custody battles, further disappointments, further insecurity about his future. What do you want from me? I asked, directly sensing there must be conditions to this offer. A clean break, she replied immediately. No contested hearings, no forensic financial investigations, no further intrusion into my personal affairs. Sign the agreement my lawyer is drafting, and Ethan stays with you while I start fresh. And the house Michael's accounts. I wasn't concerned about material assets, but I wanted to understand her complete proposition. Keep them, she said with a dismissive wave. Eric Landon's development will make those look like pocket change. I just want this chapter closed cleanly and quickly. As she outlined the details of her proposed arrangement, I maintained a neutral expression while inwardly marveling at the outcome Michael had somehow foreseen. His careful planning transferring assets to me documenting Vanessa Hale's behavior, establishing trust for Ethan had anticipated exactly the scenario. Vanessa choosing her own desires over her son's needs when forced to face the responsibilities of genuine parenting. 1 week later, I sat in Judge Paula Grant's chambers as she reviewed the voluntary custody agreement Vanessa had signed the day before departing for Nassau, Bahamas with Eric Landon. This is an unusual resolution, the judge commented, studying the document carefully. Ms. Hale is surrendering all parental rights except for limited visitation at your discretion. She believes it's in Ethan's best interest while she relocates internationally for an extended period, I explained, using the diplomatic phrasing Daniel Brooks had suggested. Judge Grant's expression suggested she wasn't fooled by this characterization. But she nodded slowly. And you're prepared to assume full legal guardianship of your grandson at your age. Mrs. Carter, without hesitation, I replied firmly. Ethan needs stability, love, and connection to his father's memory. I can provide all three. The judge studied me thoughtfully before signing the final orders. Based on all evidence presented throughout these proceedings, as well as Ms. Hale's voluntary relinquishment custody of Ethan Carter, is hereby granted to Helen Carter with arrangements for support payments and limited visitation as outlined in the agreement. Outside the courthouse, with Ethan Carter waiting at home with Mrs. Coleman, the kind neighbor who'd helped us throughout this journey, I finally allowed myself to absorb the magnitude of what had happened. I had become, in every meaningful sense, my grandson's parent, a role I had never anticipated at 66, but one I embraced with complete commitment. Michael would be proud, Daniel Brooks said quietly as we walked to our cars. He protected Ethan the only way he could, by entrusting him to you. 6 months later, on a crisp autumn afternoon, Ethan and I planted a memorial garden in the backyard. Michael's favorite flowers and plants arranged around a small stone bench, where we could sit and talk to Dad whenever Ethan felt the need. "Do you think Dad knew Mom would leave?" Ethan asked, as we patted soil around a young rose bush. The question caught me off guard with its perceptiveness. "I think your father knew that sometimes adults make choices based on what they want rather than what children need," I answered carefully. "And he wanted to make sure you'd always have someone who put you first." Ethan nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. "I miss Dad every day, but I don't miss how things were after he died, when Mom was always angry or gone. Your dad made sure you'd be taken care of," I said, pulling him into a gentle hug. "And that's exactly what I intend to do for as long as you need me." That evening, as Ethan slept peacefully upstairs, I sat in Michael's study now, a shared space where Ethan did homework while I handled household management and opened the small box of personal items Daniel had delivered after the final custody arrangement. Inside was one last letter from my son marked when it's resolved. "Mom, if you're reading this, you've done what I couldn't, protected Ethan from a situation I saw deteriorating but couldn't fix in time." I watched Vanessa Hale's priorities shift, saw her resentment of family responsibilities grow, noticed her increasing absences. When I discovered her relationship with Eric Landon, I realized Ethan would eventually become collateral damage in her pursuit of the life she really wanted. "I'm sorry for the burden I placed on you. Asking a mother to step in as parent again at your age wasn't fair, but I knew you would do it without hesitation. Just as you've always put family first, Ethan couldn't ask for a better guardian, a more loving presence, or a stronger advocate. Tell him stories about me. Not just the good ones, the real ones about my mistakes and how I tried to fix them. About how sometimes we see the truth too late, but we do the best we can with the time we have. I love you both more than words can express. Michael." I pressed the letter to my heart, tears flowing freely now that Ethan Carter couldn't see. The journey had been harder than I could have imagined. The grief of losing Michael compounded by the battles with Vanessa Hale and the challenge of helping Ethan heal from multiple traumas. Yet, as I looked around the home we now shared permanently, at the evidence of a child growing secure and loved homework, spread across the table a soccer cleat by the door artwork, taped proudly to the refrigerator. I knew Michael had been right to trust me with his most precious legacy. Through his foresight, in changing his will through my careful documentation, and strategic patience through Ethan's remarkable resilience, we had created something beautiful from tragedy. A new family constellation different than what any of us had expected, but solid and true. Some might call it justice that Vanessa Hale had ultimately chosen freedom over motherhood, revealing precisely the character Michael had anticipated. But I preferred to think of it as redemption, the chance to honor my son by raising his child with the values he cherished, ensuring that despite everything, love would have the final word in our story. Vanessa Hale voluntarily surrenders custody to pursue her new life with Eric Landon in Nassau, Bahamas. The resolution Michael somehow foresaw becomes reality not through bitter court battles, but through Vanessa's own choice to prioritize her desires over her son's needs. As Ethan and I build our new life together, I discover one final letter from Michael acknowledging the burden he placed on me while expressing complete trust in my ability to give his son the love and stability he deserves. 4 years later. Grandma. I got the lead in the school play. Ethan burst through the front door, his 13-year-old energy filling the house as he dropped his backpack and thrust a script into my hands. 4 years had transformed the quiet, anxious 9-year-old into a confident, thriving middle schooler whose smile now reached his eyes consistently. That's wonderful. I examined the script. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Playing young Scrooge is a big responsibility. I'm so proud of you. Mrs. Parker said Dad played the same role when he was in 8th grade. Did you know that? My heart warmed at his casual reference to Michael. Wade worked hard to keep his father's memory alive through stories, photos, and the small traditions we maintained. Saturday morning pancakes, summer fishing trips to Michael's favorite lake, the memory garden we tended together. I certainly did. I still have the program somewhere in the attic boxes. Your father was quite the actor in school. I smiled, remembering teenage Michael nervously practicing lines in our living room. He'd be thrilled to see you following in his footsteps. Ethan grinned. Then his expression turned more serious. Do you think should we tell Mom about the play? The question didn't surprise me, though. Vanessa Hale had essentially vanished from Ethan's life after moving to Nassau, Bahamas. Her promised video calls dwindling to rare, awkward birthday messages and eventually stopping altogether. Ethan occasionally still sought connection with her. We can send her an email with the dates, I said carefully. It's entirely up to you. He considered this, then shook his head. Maybe not. She didn't answer when I wrote about winning the science fair, and she's probably still in Asia with Eric Landon anyway. Through infrequent updates from Daniel Brooks, who maintained minimal professional contact with Vanessa's attorney regarding support payments, we knew she and Eric had married and were now developing resort properties in Thailand. The support checks arrived regularly, the one commitment she maintained, but contained no personal notes or inquiries about Ethan's well-being. Whatever you decide is fine, I assured him, maintaining the balanced approach our family therapist had recommended, acknowledging Vanessa's existence without creating false expectations of her return or involvement. I think just you and the Colemans and Uncle Daniel is enough audience for me, Ethan decided, referring to our neighbors who had become like extended family, and to Daniel Brooks, who had transitioned from Michael's attorney to a cherished uncle figure in Ethan's life. As Ethan bounded upstairs to start homework, I moved to the kitchen to prepare dinner, pausing to adjust the collection of photos on the refrigerator. Ethan winning his karate tournament, building a science project, laughing with friends at his last birthday party. A visual timeline of healing and growth. The journey hadn't always been smooth. The first year after gaining full custody had brought nightmares, academic struggles, and occasional angry outbursts as Ethan processed the effective loss of both parents. There had been challenging questions I'd struggled to answer. Why doesn't Mom want to talk to me anymore? Did I do something wrong to make her leave? If Dad hadn't died, would Mom have stayed? With the help of an excellent child psychologist, we'd navigated these painful waters together. I'd learned to validate his feelings without vilifying Vanessa, to help him understand that her choices reflected her limitations, not his worthiness. Now, 4 years later, Ethan Carter had found his footing. His grades were excellent, his circle of friends solid, his emotional resilience remarkable for a child who had experienced such significant losses. The house that had once been Michael's, then briefly mine, had truly become ours, filled with evidence of our shared life. Ethan's art projects displayed alongside my watercolor attempts, his sports equipment sharing space with my gardening tools, photo albums documenting our camping trips and holiday celebrations. At 70, I had found unexpected vitality in this second round of parenting. The responsibility had given me purpose, while Ethan's energy kept me active and engaged. I'd even started dating recently, a kind widower I'd met through the community theater where Ethan took acting classes. Nothing serious yet, but a pleasant reminder that life continued to offer surprises at every stage. My phone chimed with a text message from Daniel Brooks. Court approved the college fund restructuring. All set for Ethan's future education, protected exactly as Michael wanted. Another piece of Michael's careful planning falling into place. Despite Vanessa Hale's initial attempts to gain control of Ethan's educational trust, Michael's foresight had created ironclad protections. Now those funds were secured in a structure that would provide for Ethan's college and perhaps even graduate education, regardless of what happened to me in the coming years. As I prepared dinner, I reflected on the strange path that had brought us here. The midnight call that had shattered our world. The gradual revelation of Vanessa's true character. The careful strategy that had ultimately protected Ethan from becoming collateral damage in her pursuit of a different life. In my darkest moments during those early days after Michael's death, I couldn't have imagined the life Ethan and I would build from the ashes of that tragedy. The grief remained, would always remain, but it had been integrated into a new reality, filled with meaningful connections and moments of genuine joy. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw our neighbor, Mrs. Coleman, holding a covered dish. "I made too much lasagna again," she announced as I opened the door, her standard excuse for the meals she regularly shared with us. "And Bill Coleman wants to know if Ethan is still coming to help with the birdhouse project this weekend. He's been talking about nothing else," I confirmed, accepting the dish gratefully. "Would you and Bill Coleman like to join us for dinner? Ethan just got some exciting news about the school play," as Mrs. Coleman stepped inside, calling up the stairs to congratulate Ethan, who responded with enthusiastic thanks. I felt the quiet satisfaction of community, of the support network we'd built around ourselves that extended beyond biological family. Later that evening, after Ethan Carter had gone to bed, I sat in the peaceful quiet of the living room and opened the memory book we'd created during that first difficult year. Photos of Michael at various ages. Ethan's childish handwriting describing favorite memories of his father. Cards from friends and family offering support during our custody journey. On the final page was a quote from Michael's last letter to me. "Tell him stories about me, not just the good ones, the real ones about my mistakes and how I tried to fix them." I had honored that request, sharing with Ethan the full human truth of his father. A good man who had recognized his marriage was failing, who had seen the potential impact on his son, who had taken concrete steps to protect his child's future, even while hoping those protections wouldn't be necessary. When Ethan had asked why his father had changed his will without telling Vanessa Hale, it explained as gently as possible. "Your dad saw that your mom was making choices that might not prioritize your needs. He wanted to make sure someone would always put you first, no matter what." It was the truth, simplified for a child's understanding, but honest. We had maintained that honesty throughout our journey together, building trust through difficult conversations rather than comfortable evasions. Outside the garden Michael had loved and Ethan now helped tend caught the last golden light of evening. The roses had planted were blooming again, a reminder that life continues its cycles regardless of our personal losses. Inside, his son slept peacefully, surrounded by photos of the father who had loved him enough to ensure his protection even after death. As I closed the memory book and prepared for bed myself, I thought about Michael's extraordinary foresight. He couldn't have known exactly how events would unfold, couldn't have predicted his own untimely death, or Vanessa's eventual complete departure from Ethan's life. Yet he had recognized the essential character of the woman he'd married, had seen the warning signs of her prioritizing personal desires over family responsibilities, and had taken concrete steps to protect what mattered most to him. In doing so, he'd given both Ethan and me an unexpected gift. Not just financial security or legal protection, but the opportunity to forge a new family bond that might never have developed otherwise, through our shared grief and subsequent healing. Ethan Carter and I had created something beautiful and enduring, a relationship built on mutual trust, respect, and genuine love that transcended traditional family boundaries. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Helping Ethan memorize lines for his play, attending my own water aerobics class that kept my joints mobile, coordinating with Daniel Brooks about long-term financial planning, ordinary life continuing in its imperfect, precious way. But tonight, in the quiet of the home we had made together, I felt profound gratitude for my son's final gift. The chance to help raise his child, to see Michael's best qualities emerging in Ethan, to ensure that despite everything, love and wisdom would be his son's true inheritance. Not the legacy any of us would have chosen, perhaps, but one we had transformed through courage and persistence and boundless love into something unexpectedly beautiful.